Here we go. Almost done. Almost done. And then I'm going to show you cool pictures and things. But anyway, we were talking about gouges before my computer decided to disagree with me. As I said, the number that's on the handle that is on the right-hand side is the width in millimeters. The number that's on the left, sometimes accompanied by a letter, has to do with the pitch of the curve, the degree out of flat. So like a 0 or a 1, let's see, 1s usually refer to something that's flat or beveled on both sides. The higher the curve, the more dramatic that ends up being. To the point that this 13 isn't even a curve anymore. It's actually a V shape. So the V gouges, I believe, are like 12s, 13s, 14s, and then even from there, the sides of the V can change pretty dramatically. So this is a 1310, and it looks like that on the end. More common, though, of course, is going to be the gouges that have a round contour. So this is what's referred to as a V gouge because it literally leaves behind a V shape, right? The round ones are the ones that are just going to have a number and a number. I find that I use, personally, the 8-7 almost more than any other gouge out there for lots of reasons. But yeah, 8, it's got a fairly, significant swoop. The 3, this 3F12 here, is pretty flat. You can see the difference. They're, it's still round, but it's, whatever. So what do those letters end up standing for? In this case, this 1S16, S stands for skew. Just like the chisels here have a square end, skew chisels do not. They are skewed off to the side. They're also sharpened on both sides. So you're going to have, for your gouges, you'll have regular round ones. Let's see, V, gouge. Skew chisels are extremely dangerous. Mostly because they have this skew kind of built into them. If you think about it, the skew chisel, because of the nature of the angle of the blade, it wants to exit in a particular direction. If you are, by some, stack of idiocy, holding onto a piece of wood and doing this with it, the skew chisel will exit very fast. And I know someone who did a really dumb thing to their hand doing that. So, skew chisels are usually used to clear out small areas of detail where you need something that is going to kind of like fall away really quickly and not have, square edges like the way the regular one does. What are you looking for? Regular. Okay. Yeah. REG. Just regular. Plain old regular gouge there. The fishtail gouge is awesome because it doesn't have that same width of shank that the regular ones do. So, comparatively speaking, a regular gouge is going to have a certain amount of length on it that is sharpenable, like all the way back, essentially. The fishtail has a fishtail. It tapers in very, very quickly. As a result, it's easy to clear out flat spaces with it. It's really rad for that. When I would teach carving as its own class, which I used to do at my last job, the fishtail gouge was everybody's favorite because you could do bas-relief with it really, really easily. Kind of carve out something in relief, and then come in and flatten this area all around it. It's really cool. How do you use them though? That's really the question. Again, with these, if you're gonna go by hand, typically it's a two-handed thing. I have been known to carve one-handed, but I am always doing it in a very small motion. And usually I'm not pushing with my whole hand, I'm flexing my hand like this, which is an extension of a way of whittling. Which if you guys want to learn how to whittle, I can teach you that too, because believe it or not, it's its own thing. But these gouges, naturally, the larger the gouge, the more material it's going to want to move. I can, just with my hands, push and create a nice texture. That's kind of looks a little like big broad feathers or something, right? Of course, the smaller I go, the narrower the mark is that I'm making. You'll all be able to see this in a minute. You can cut across the grain. It just doesn't tend to be very clean, even though that's making a really wonderful sound. So let's say I wanted to accentuate my bandsaw mark here. I could do that just by coming in and carving a little bit more. Ooh, so much fun. I typically, though, with these, I don't use the mallet unless I'm using a really, really large tool. Typically, I'm using my hands. The reason being is that the harder the steel, the more brittle it is. So these can actually maintain a much sharper edge than even the chisels can, but they break way, way more easily. Please do your best to not drop anything on the floor. If it drops on the floor, it is going to chip, and I'm going to have to completely regrind the whole thing, and it makes me sad. And it will make you sad too. The easiest way to sharpen your gouges is to keep them sharp. I forgot to grab the strop at the beginning of class. I should have done that. But we have these leather, kind of what looks like a leather block, essentially. Pieces of leather that have been glued down to a block and then impregnated with polishing compound. And pretty much what we do is we just drag the sharpened surface, not point first, but the back side of it, across that, and it just polishes that edge up a little bit. And if it has started to roll a burr over, frequently it'll roll it back. And you can extend the life of your cutting surface that way really pretty easily. When I say sometimes I cut towards myself, what I do is I hold the tool in my hand like this, with my thumb kind of right at that juncture, and then I can take little chunks out. For example, if I'm trying to make circles, carving a circle is actually really difficult, if you can believe it. It involves just taking a tiny chip out across the grain here. But because I'm not pulling, I'm just doing a rocking motion with my wrist, there's really no danger, or very, very limited danger in terms of cutting yourself. There will always be danger in cutting yourself if you're holding it far enough up that you can, catch yourself even a little bit. Always a bad idea. That, my friends, is the basics of the tools that are part of this assignment. Do you have questions about any of them? I'll show the box here real quick for the carving textures that I've left behind. So your assignment, and I'll write it out more dramatically, but the assignment is that you need to make an object, any object you wish, that employs primarily as its construction method the bandsaw box method of working. Meaning that you're going to start with a solid block, you're going to cut it apart in a particular order, you're going to create a hollow inside of it, and then you're going to glue it back together again. From there, you must use at least 2 different hand-working methods. Oh, I totally spaced. I'm sorry. This isn't the last one. There's another one. Oh, sorry. I'm so glad I remembered. Idiot. This will be quick, though. Because remember, I was saying we're working from most aggressive to least aggressive. Least aggressive, rasps and files, right? Sarah Martin, come on, girl. So, once we go from gouges, we've got rasps and files. I'm so sorry. Rasps and files, very straightforward. A rasp is almost always going to be more aggressive than a file. Does anyone know what the difference between a rasp and a file is? I'll tell you. I'll just make it easy. Rasps have individual teeth that have been graved and pulled up, so it looks like it's got claws. Files have a whole series of blades, essentially, that have been cut into it, so that they've been sliced and then, you know, that's the best way I can describe it. This has blades, this has teeth. So a rasp is going to move a lot more material than a file will typically. There's of course different cuts for each of these things. We don't really need to know the difference between them for any of the stuff that you're going to be doing. You're going to be able to tell the difference in aggressiveness just based on touching the tool. Run your thumbs over it, see what feels like it's going to move more material. But this rasp that I have here, the Nicholson 49, it's a really common woodworker's rasp because it moves a lot of material without being overly damaging to what I got there. So how do they work? If you've never done this before, you would be surprised to know that rasps and files only work on the push. Frequently you'll see someone being like, making a sawing motion. This is only actually doing its job when it's pushing forward. Same thing with the files. Sandpaper is multi-directional. That's cool. It's going to cut no matter what direction you push it in. But with a rasp and a file, only on the push. So, just like when you are playing around with the sander and you have to have a little bit of weight on the front of your piece in order to get it to engage, with this, you have to have a hand on the front end to get it to bite. So, it'll look like this. And I'm trying to move the file or rasp along its length as much as possible. So I'm not doing this because that's kind of silly. You guys see? I'm sorry. But rather I'm kind of moving it over and through at the same time. So I'm starting one corner here and I'm moving the file as I'm moving the cut. It's hard to describe. What I see a lot is this, which isn't doing anything because you're moving the same section over one area a lot. Or I see a lot of this, where you're just working one little section here. If you're trying to make something nice and continuous, the thing to do is to move the entire thing through as much as possible. I am still dragging back. I'm just not putting pressure on it when I do it, because I would be wasting energy. Now, you should try your best not to get these too clogged up, because believe it or not, they're not going to cut if they're completely full of stuff. So to that end, we have these guys here. These are called file cards. Try to grab one that has both a metal side and a brush side. Not all of them have both. The brush I typically use for clearing out the files because it doesn't damage the blade cut very much. And if I need to, I will use the metal side, especially on the rasps. Don't go back and forth. You're not scrubbing, you're trying to pick this out. So go the opposite direction of the cut and it should pull everything out. The rasps will leave behind a pretty aggressive texture. So, like anything, I'm going to want to work down from most aggressive to least aggressive. So if I do my shaping with my rasp, I'm going to want to refine that with a file, and then even potentially refine it further with a finer file. It's just one of them things. So same idea. Both times what it's going to leave behind is this really fine diagonal pattern, assuming you're working probably diagonally. Sometimes you want to keep that pattern. Sometimes that is something you're going to work with your finish. Typically though, if you're trying to make it look really smooth, if you don't work all of your tool marks out, it's going to look hurried or unfinished or amateurish. So try your best to start to train yourself to look for your tool marks. That's a thing. Look for your tool marks. If you can identify them, if you can see them, if you haven't worked them out, you probably haven't refined your material enough. All right? The file is also another excellent chamfering tool, especially on something that is going to be end grain based. Like, I would never try to cut my end grain with these block planes. As much as I love them, they are not sharp enough or well maintained enough to ever really cut end grain well. So, if I wanted this to look really nice, making sure I was still cutting with the grain, because, you know, here's the ends of my straws. If I cut this way, it's going to be supported. If I cut down, it's not. They're going to fall away. I can actually achieve a really pretty smooth surface like this. So, questions? Make sure when you are done with the tool that it is clean, it is not rusty, it doesn't have glue on it, any of that stuff. If you feel like when you come to a tool or before you put one back, it needs attention for whatever reason, let me know, or clean it off with some WD-40 and a rag. Don't use any abrasives, please. Just WD-40 it up, wipe it down, put it away. Rust is our big enemy, and we need things that are going to inhibit rust. All right? Okay, now let's talk about the project. Now let's talk about the project. So like I said, any kind of vessel form, anything that's using, it doesn't even have to be a vessel form, but the idea is that you are creating a hollow of some variety. And so, ooh, and look at how much I worked that wall thickness away. That was just me playing with the scrub plane, and you can see the difference in wall thickness. So, you know, that's a thing right there. Remember how I said to plan for material removal? Well, that's what I'm talking about. Those walls were the same thickness before. I'm sure as hell aren't now. So I wanted to show you some examples, both of like basic boxes, some complicated boxes, whatever. Naturally, boxes are kind of the logical thing that you're looking at, right? Because this is a bandsaw box method. It doesn't have to be a box, quote unquote, though. Like I said, it could be a sculpture. It could be, in this case, I'm going to show you some cabinets that are made this way. Simply by changing the orientation. Try not to burn myself. Simply by changing the orientation, you can change the nature of the object, right? What is a box like this is a cabinet like this, right? Hey, look at that. That's how it works. So you all saw this initial example that I gave you guys of Jenna Goldberg's piece, right? You've all had a chance to look at that. This would be about as straightforward as you could get. In terms of your assignment, this would match the assignment. The scale wouldn't be ambitious enough, but in terms of the processes, this would be fine. Because you're gonna have, I think, another 4 weeks to complete this, if I'm not mistaken. I need to look at what I have down for your due date, but it's gonna take us to about the halfway point of the semester. Yeah, because what does she have on here in terms of hand tooling? Well, obviously all this carving is going to be a hand tool process. I don't see another one that's completely overt, but let's pretend for the sake of argument that she's also sculpted the shape of the knob. Like that would meet those two criteria, and this is a perfectly beautiful object. Now make it, you know, make it much larger, and you would have something that's appropriate for the time frame that I'm giving you for the assignment, right? This is another little example box that I made 1,000,000 years ago that has a much different aesthetic. It's all faceted, and you know, each plane is painted a slightly different color. One thing you can see though, when you look inside, is that Remember how I said you need to leave a lot of material in the end grain here in order to keep keep the sides together? This is busting through its end grain. There is a big crack right at its narrowest point here because there's not enough mass to keep it. I gotta start walking that way too, I'm sorry guys. To keep the whole thing together. So, part of it is that I was making this out of a real jank piece of wood that I had, but I didn't help matters any by undercutting and shaping my end that much. But I was trying to introduce another set of angles. Like I love all these little bevels on here. Ooh, so hot. This shit's so hot right now. Oh my god. Little material right there. Yeah, it's down to like 3/8 maybe in the corner there because of how far undercuts have gone. One other thing too to point out about this box is that you may notice, so this one has that curve in it to reference, right? This one actually has an angle. I did this with 2 cuts. I did it very intentionally. I came in, I made 1 cut, I backed straight out, I came back in and I met the other cut. So don't think to yourself, I'm gonna be able to do something zigzagged. People do that every semester and it's like, oh, that's not possible. That's something that's going to make you insane. Yeah, you can do 1 point like this and that's it. Because you can't exit back out again from that. So just bear that in mind. I love this little thing. I'll finish it one of these days. It's so cute. I tend not to finish my examples because they're so, like they're doing a job for me. They're an example. Some of you guys were looking at this dude, this long drink of water here. This is a piece of basswood. You can see the size of the board that I got this out of. This started as something 8/4, and instead of laying it flat like this, it's turned up. Same thing with those other 2 like landscape boxes there. I made this as an exercise in a residency where we were trying to communicate something about travel and time. And I had just moved from New Bedford, Massachusetts, which is in the Northeast, to San Diego, California to do this residency, which involved a week-long cross-country trip and a lot of changes in terrain and in feelings about that terrain, or actually mostly feelings about where I was. I hated living in Massachusetts. That place sucks. Sorry, Mass. And as I got farther east or west, the happier I got, frankly. I grew up in Wisconsin. I love the upper Midwest. And wow, Southern California is an incredible place. It's kind of crazy, but it's like what I always imagined the Garden of Eden might look like, like just beautiful. So anyway, the terrain changes, and then the content changes too. After class, feel free to come up and like really explore that. But because this like landscape box was kind of a hit, I've been dicking around with variations on it for a long time. So these are other sample boxes that I've made on in various semesters. And the idea with this was just that they would end up being a continuation of one another at some point. So like that the landscape, you could show them like that, or you could show them kind of staggered and make it look like, things are receding. And then this interior is micaceous iron oxide, what I like to refer to as nature's glitter. It's naturally occurring. It's not like, it's iron oxide. It's micaceous iron oxide. It's a mineral. So it's not glitter that's being produced. I kind of wanted it to look like a underground cave kind of a deal. Never got very far with it, but it was fun. It was fun. But think about the orientation of your boards. It doesn't have to be flat. It can be tall. You can take advantage of that aspect of it. The 2 other examples I brought out here are much more ambitious. I made both of them. at differing points in my education. So the egg here, I made in undergrad, and it's actually part of a bigger sort of suite of objects. But when you open it, you open it this way, that would be why. When you open it up, it's a vanity. And the whole thing is a bandsaw box. I just had to put it together in a particular way. It's got velvet in the very bottom, a mirror in the top, and a little tray to hold your stuff. And if you look at it, it's glued up in layers. Lots of layers of 12-quarter poplar, all the way up. This is made of its own 2 layers. This all by itself, this was 1 layer. You'll be able to kind of see how it was constructed just by looking at it. And I used a big angled cut in order to make it so that things would nest and rest. And I hollowed out my insides, glued everything together, and then shaped my outside. Because remember, what's the most important thing about process when you're making a bandsaw box? You work from,
Inside out.
there it is, inside to outside. Say it with me, inside to outside. Inside to outside. Oh my God, you guys sound like you're gonna die. It's adorable. Seriously though, do not F that up. Inside to outside. Every freaking time. So I had to do a lot of planning to get this to work, you know? But it did. It's crazy. It's insane, but it's kind of rad. In terms of its surface though, once I had done its big shaping, I used an angle grinder, a pneumatic angle grinder I just came in and went, made little individual marks on this, and then pigmented the whole thing like 7 times. Pinks and blacks and all sorts of crazy things, and then like melted all this wax into it and just like, and that's how it has this surface. So you could accomplish something like this with the hand tools, but I did this with a power tool, and it made a lot of difference in terms of time. This would be the utmost in ambition for this assignment, in terms of like having to engineer multiple layers like that, having to figure out all of that other stuff. Frankly, I don't think our bandsaw is big enough to accommodate something like this. I did this when I had access to a 30-inch bandsaw. Think about it. That's a 20-inch bandsaw. So we're talking about something that had 10 additional inches of diameter and a throat that accommodated something as tall as this. We don't have that. So remember those limitations too when you're thinking about your designs. So one more physical example for you to look at before we look at the slideshow is this experiment. I did a couple of these in grad school. Remember how I was saying you can make something a cabinet just by hanging it on the wall? I made this one with a pivoting door and then this interior. I made a couple of these that were inspired by specific natural objects. I did a black one that was based on a guinea fowl feather, and this one was based on a pearl button. And its shape is very, very, very loosely related to like a skate egg. You know what I'm talking about? Or a shark's egg, mermaid's purse. But it pivots. And then here's this drawer. That drawer fits right in there. It does actually fit all the way back, but because it doesn't have a handle on it at the moment, which was, wait for it, that pearl button, that was the drawer pull, doesn't really fit at the moment. But you can make, that's another thing, you can make drawers within this just by making essentially a smaller bandsaw box. You take the parts that you're removing, in this case, this chunk, I put a different kind of wood on the front, like I cut it shorter, and I hollowed it out and put some fabric on the bottom to make it like fancy. See that? And then put this pivoting thing on here. The reason I didn't want you to try to take it off is because of the weight, essentially. People try to lift, and then they bend the pin. But I can lift it away so that you can see it in its entirety that way. So, make sense? So let me show you some concrete examples. Okay. Hopefully this will show up sort of on the screen. If it doesn't, it has merit for its audio because I will be, of course, going through this again. Well, I'll be posting this slideshow along with the video. So, will you acknowledge what I'm doing? That's the real question. There we go. All right. So, this is the work of Michael Cullen. His whole shtick is bandsaw boxes. He does workshops all over the country. He takes really lovely pieces of wood, cuts them apart in the order, carves them, paints them, all that good stuff. These are, if you did something as ambitious as, say, maybe that blue one or the green one there, I would accept that in terms of degree of complication for your project. It is a pretty straightforward interpretation, though. If you are an art student and want to really challenge yourself, I would suggest you think about content and concept. You know, what does it hold? How does it that function reflect itself on the object itself? Things of that nature. Here are more of his pieces. He does a really interesting thing where he doesn't cut the sides from the ends. He cuts the sides from themselves, essentially, and does it with a curved bandsaw, not a curved blade, but a curved cut that's at an angle. So he tips the bed of the bandsaw to achieve kind of a drum-like shape where it's hollow, parallel all the way down there. The piece on the right there, the brown, oh wow, yeah, that's barely visible. That is made out of Claro walnut, which is a kind of California hardwood, and each smaller box is made from the previous interior cut. So they nest, ultimately. Here's some more, just a close-up of his process. He uses a lot of paint called milk paint. It was extremely popular among woodworkers in the 90s, partly for its properties, in that it chemically bonds to the material. It doesn't just sit on top. It comes as a dry powder. We mix it together with water, warm water usually, and it turns it into paint. And after a couple of layers, you get these kind of earthy tones but it has chemically bonded to the material. It does not want to go anywhere. It's just tough as nails. It's called milk paint, of course, because it was made from milk. The proteins in the milk were typically added with lye to cause this kind of reaction to make this extremely hard thing. So these are some typical milk paint colors. Here's that one. You can see he's got layers of the black and the red, and you can see where the red is coming through. And of course, he's painted the interior yellow. So remember, this is a process that leaves behind lots of tool marks. If you're thinking to yourself, I want something with perfectly square sides and perfect transitions and everything will be smooth and natural and amazing, that's very difficult to accomplish unless you are willing to put in a really crazy amount of work that requires extra care. This is a much more organic process that you're going to be working with this. So if you're thinking to yourself, no, I want this beautiful, perfect, rectilinear thing, don't. I guess would be the best way to put that. Be prepared to be disappointed if that's your expectation. This is a much more organic process, which is why, if you see all of those examples that I have up there, they are for the most part very organic in nature. Even that faceted looking one is the result of hand tooling and not machining, if that makes any sense. These cool things are the work of Tom Lozer. He is just an incredible woodworker. Has a show right now at the Center for Art and Wood that's this huge retrospective of his career. But these little dudes all twist and like do all sorts of crazy things, and then look at their insides. In this case, instead of cutting off the top and the bottom, he cut off the bottom and then the sides and then the top. So that little change in order in which he did those things, you know, enabled him to make it so that they sit right inside. And then if you take a look at the middle piece, he may not have even, honestly, he may not even have cut off the bottom. He may have just cut off the sides and then the top. Why do I say that? Well, if the middle here, this could have been accomplished by just coming in and making a single bandsaw cut and right back out again. Don't make more work for yourself if you don't need to. There are ways to do that. And then, you know, he could have cut a flange for reference just by, you know, cutting the top off of that piece, and there it would be. Make sense? But again, he had to work inside to outside. He had to be able to know that he was going to change the plane of that exterior before he ever started cutting. So probably gave himself a whole lot extra and then worked subtractively to get him to sit in those planes, because he sure didn't bandsaw it like that. That would require bandsawing on air. Again, this is more Jenna Goldberg's work. This is to kind of show you the range of sizes that those boxes come in. The green one on the far right there is actually larger than the one that I showed you. That piece is about 10 inches long to begin with. The blue one is a good 2 feet. And again, you can see how she's treating the interior. So much fun, so much like activity, and ugh. Here's some more of her work. So you can also make your life easier when you're doing bandsaw boxes by taking advantage of natural breaks in the material. Like, if you think to yourself, in order to get the block to be the size that I need it to be, I'm going to have to glue together all of these pieces. Well, why would you do that and then turn around and cut off a top again, or a bottom? Why don't you factor in the top and bottom when you're doing your lamination? Those could be separate pieces of wood that don't need to be glued on and then cut back off again. That's what's going on here. In this, that's the inside. Instead of, it is a bandsaw box, but instead of taking a solid piece and then cutting off the top and cutting off the bottom, she took advantage of the way that the whole thing was laminated together. The top is a separate piece, the bottom is a separate piece, and believe it or not, the 2 layers there were also separate. She initially started by cutting out that layer, and then, actually no, I take that back. The middle was one thing. I take that back. But the lid, why on earth would you like make a piece big and then make it small again? So just think about that in terms of your process, right? Save yourself some time. And that's not cheating as far as I'm concerned. As long as you're still creating that void in some way. I love this one. I don't have a picture of the inside. She laughs at me because she made this specifically for a dude, and I'm like, so? She's like, it's a men's box. And I was like, who the fuck cares? It's my favorite. So I leave it in there because it's a beautiful, beautiful example of design work and handwork. And you know, you may be able to tell, I don't know if you can quite, but the lid itself extends beyond the box. Right at the front there. And so when you open it, you put your fingers right under the front. It doesn't have to have a handle or anything like that. It's just part of the design. Oh, these things are nuts. This, I think, is Michael DeForest, if I'm not mistaken. The next one will let me know. These open. I sadly don't have a picture of them in that form, but you can see where the lid is there. It's that weird, it cut right into the middle of the salmon. The thing that I include this for, partly is so that you can see the kinds of materials that you can use to do surface treatment. This has like colored pencil and paint and like crayons and stuff, but also because you can take additional pieces and add to it. This is not a strictly reductive process. This is also an additive one. So, like the fins, for example. These guys are not part of this original block. The fins have been glued in, usually with like some other joinery method, like a dowel or some toothpicks even before. But if you think about it, the grain direction here is running the long way through the fish. If it was running that same direction through the fins, they would snap right off. Make sense? So you want to make these so that the grain is running in such a way that it's going to keep its strength. And then glue it right there. I remember the piece I didn't show you, my very first piece of woodworking. I'll show you later. Ooh. Look at how big that one is. I don't know if you can tell, but if you see the size of the label on the pedestal there, this thing's like Congolese coffin sized. It's huge. But that's how it's done. These little things, they're so cute. This is, I forget what the title of this is. It's something like, do you want to play ball, son? But this is the work of Colin Pisano. He's a former student of mine in Philadelphia. And these are bandsaw boxes. The limbs in this case have been attached after the fact. He started with a block that was too big, right? Added these little pieces on with some joinery, and then carved everything back so that it would look continuous. And then painted it. The drawers that are in there, those white faces are actually drawers. He did add that piece on separately, but the drawer itself that's inside there is actually made from the negative space. This is some more Tom Lozer work. These technically are not bandsaw boxes, but I included them because they could be very easily. The cool thing about this is that each one of these, wake up. Hello. Oh, stop that. Sorry, my computer is being silly. So, there we go. Each one of these, you'll notice the knob gets bigger and the drawer gets smaller. This is what's going on here. So, tiny knob, big drawer, medium knob, medium drawer, giant knob, tiny drawer. But I mean, come on, that's clever. They were not bandsaw boxes, but like I said, they very easily could have been. This could have just as easily been constructed out of the wood that came out from that interior space as as it was to build this separately. Does everyone understand what I'm saying there? Yeah, somewhat. Great. These are a couple more of his. These are also bandsaw boxes. And these were just like paint and formal exercises. Look at them. So again, they take advantage of the natural texture and quality that these leave behind. Admittedly, the end grain on all of these is much thinner than I ever would have expected would be like workable for something like this. But it might be that he pre-treated these with epoxy, which like plasticizes everything. Typically speaking, it's not going to be super cooperative. I know for a fact too that he made these out of mahogany, and like real mahogany, not African mahogany, which is a very cooperative wood. Real mahogany likes to not move around on you too much, so he may have been able to get away with keeping his end grain nice and tight for that reason. But aren't they lovely? Just bright colors, playing with some iridescent interference colors. Ooh, yes. So these are the work of Michael Hurwitz, who is just an incredible woodworker. And the cool thing about these, apart from their handles, like the one on the left, the handle is definitely constructed separately, but that vessel form right in the middle, that was a bandsaw box. In this case, you cut off the sides, you cut out a big shape in the middle, you glue the sides back on, you cut out the outside shape, you do the shaping. So you can make these like really kind of interesting forms like that. And then the one on the left there, that texture that's in there was made with a hand plane. And then like the low kind of contrast is accomplished with multiple layers of paint that have been very lightly sanded through. Similarly here, these are both made that same way. But it's just a question of how do you cut it apart so that this is your end result when you put it back together. It's a little complicated, but it's pretty rad. Oh, who's this? Dean Pulver, maybe? I'm not sure who this is. I brought this one in, though, because this is another one where they changed the order in which they cut things out slightly. See how the lid is sitting inside the opening instead of sitting on top? So again, the lid was created the same way that you would have made the flange otherwise. You know what I'm saying? So they cut the bottom off, the sides off, the ends off. The lid itself was what would be the flange. I don't know who made this. I think Joe Stone made it. I sincerely doubt that this is all made out of a single piece. I think the box part, that red part, is one thing. I think the green part is another thing that have been joined together. So you don't have to make the whole thing out of one solid piece. You can make these aggregate forms. There's nothing wrong with that. And then especially like those little nubbies that are on everything, those were definitely made separately and then attached. And that's a really easy thing to do with dowels. What we do is we drill mating holes, one on each thing, and put a dowel between them with some glue. And ta-da, it's attached. It's amazing. I made this thing. It has a tiny little scene in the top that is of Penland, which is where I was at the time. Penland, North Carolina. I made the clouds out of mica, which is like laying everywhere on the ground. That's the only picture of it that I have. Seriously, again, sorry. My computer hates me. And I hate it. That can't be the only thing. Hang on, sorry. My bad. This is very frustrating, I'm sorry. Oh my God. Apologies. I'm almost done, and class is almost done anyway, so. Like I said, this will be online, so you'll be able to see it. Show from current slide. All right, there we go. Anyway, this is Wendy Maruyama. Same idea in terms of the door being what would normally be the flange. These are first aid kits or emergency kits. The one on the left is for a pedicure. The one on the right is for actually hurting yourself. But you know, she's sort of the grande dame of cabinets that are built like this. This is another one that's made the same way. You know, bandsaw box. The little hollows that are on the right there, so it has a mirror in it. This is an emergency lipstick mirror cabinet. More Tom Lozer, more really low-res images. The doors here were made of separate pieces, but if you take a look at the cabinet bodies themselves, those were solid pieces of wood that were bandsawed apart in an order so that it created all of these kind of random interior spaces. So you could do something like this, really pretty much no problem. Putting a door on something is totally cool. It doesn't have to be a lid. Frankly, it doesn't even have to be an enclosed space. It just has to be a hollow of some kind. This is Mia Hall, same idea. You can see how this was put together in that, the body of the box itself, you know, the grain is running the long way. You're going up and across, and there's your, taken out, there's your hollow. And then she drilled out in that bottom piece to put a base in there. I'm just going to whip through the rest of these real quick because I want to show you the student examples. If you have specific questions about any of these, let me know. Look at this thing. It is actually keyed. It's a tool. It was a box to hold your favorite tool. In this case, the student's favorite tool was his brain, and he was this super, super analytical dude, and his brain is the light cube. This is Joe Bennett, who has a studio over at MAG. And the form on top here, this is a bandsaw box. It's really, really beautiful. Like I said, specific examples or specific information about examples I can get you. This is cool. This was by a student named Sarah Kahn. This whole thing is a frickin' bandsaw box. It's a wedding cake. What? The top tier doesn't open, but the middle two do, and she made all of this. She made the flowers. They weren't wood. They were made out of polymer clay, but still, like, and it was wedding cake scaled in the, it's just nuts. Anyway, a deer that was never finished, but you get the idea. And the ears, of course, were separately attached, like this is Kyle Robertson, who, he made this kind of techno-looking garden and then put real grass on the inside. This is a student project. This was Elena Barnett. And this box opened, and she was a drawing major. So she drew with the wood burning pen. That was sort of how she integrated the whole thing. I love this thing. This is her best friend, Taylor McCord. And this box takes advantage of that hand plane texture that I was talking about before. This was basswood, which is a very pink color. She then put dilute acrylic over it for the blue, and then black milk paint over that. And when she very, very lightly sanded it, all of these high points showed up, and it had this incredible texture. This thing's also really cool because it's hard to tell, but when you take the lid off, there's no picture of it. It actually has a center channel that goes all the way into the drawer. So you can open up the top, drop something into that hollow, it drops into the drawer. And you actually lock it by putting a dowel all the way into it so that you can't open the drawer at all. It's pretty cool. It's not actually leaning to the side. That's the other thing, is like there was no way that they could photograph this where you could get an understanding of the fact that it actually was standing straight up. It just, the top was cut off. Weird. This was a student who was really inspired by those basket forms that Michael Hurwitz made. Delaney Rogers, she just graduated last semester. This thing was huge, huge, huge. Beth Donovan, who is actually Professor Beth Donovan, likes to take woodworking classes. This was her intro project, is a friggin' Fibonacci box. Look at that. What? I wouldn't recommend doing anything like this. She was a lunatic. A cocoon form. She kept her bug collection in it. This is really nice. This is, I actually let this student not do both hand tool options because I taught her how to wood bend to make the little staves. A portable loom. This is pretty cool. So it had all these pins on the inside. I forget the student's name. It was an okay project. This was a very complicated one in terms of how to cut everything apart to get it to lock together. She did actually have to cut apart her middle section in 2 layers in order to get the little trays to key in like that. Anyway, that was Anna Soul. Questions? I will post all of this online. You will be able to see all the things. It'll be great.